Hi everyone, I just wanted to thank you for joining me with this video again today. And I'm delighted that joining me is Nikita Gunnewegh, which hopefully I pronounced that reasonably well. Um, and we're going to talk about mental health. And Nikita has talked very, very openly about her own challenges over the last few years with her mental health, with suicide attempts, with depression. And really, I found Nikita quite inspiring personally as I've gone through my own challenges. And when she did a talk at work, uh, which was broadcast live across the whole bank, talking about what she'd been through, and I don't think there was a dry eye in the room, let alone the virtual room, after we'd gone through that. But I found it quite an inspirational story, but also for me, it was a story about recovery, right? And it was about getting back to where she wanted to be and realized that she wanted to be. And it was great for her to help other people. I know that Nikki, you've offered to help a lot of people. You've really helped me over the last year with my own challenges with depression and anxiety as well. And thank you for that. But I thought it'd be great for us to maybe share some thoughts that others who weren't in the bank, who weren't listening to that talk, could actually benefit from. And particularly now we're back into a lockdown as we record this, and we're in winter, so short days. It's usually the worst time for mental health anyway, and it's compounded with a lot of other worries that people have in their life. So I just want to kind of throw a few questions, and then we'll just see where the conversation goes, if that's okay. But welcome, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Mike. It's an honor, and I'm really glad we're doing this because, as you say, I think the more we start talking about these things, the more we make it common ground and we make it easier to talk about it. So very happy to be here.
Fantastic. So why don't we just start off with just a simple question? What is mental health? Does mental health mean you have a problem? Should you treat your mental health? Is mental health always bad?
No, no. So mental health is different for everyone, and everyone has it. So I think that's the first myth to bust is mental health isn't bad. It's a case of constant flux, and you need to, as an individual, identify where your mental health sits. And it's kind of like weight. There's no ideal weight for everyone, and it's different based on your own individual desires, based on your own individual time of life. It's going to be in constant flux. The key is to monitor it, be aware of it, and act upon it. And really have a look at how your life is evolving, how the things and circumstances around you are evolving, and how that suits you. So you might not want to be trained as an athlete all year round. You might have certain areas where you need to focus on it, and other areas where you're going to go, I'm actually going to relax my physical health at certain points in time in the year. And I think the same concepts need to start being applied more rigorously to how we approach our mental health. But what's your thoughts on it? I know we've talked about mental health and physical health and the interrelationships, and both for ourselves and for other people quite regularly, and our thoughts on the matter have evolved. So what's your thoughts on it?
Well, I agree. I think the problem is that people, when you think about health, most people immediately think about, oh, I've got a cold, or I've got maybe a tummy bug, or something like that. And then you think about, when you talk about physical issues, people may think about a sprained ankle or a broken leg or things like that. But as soon as you say mental health, people say, oh, you're crazy, right? And you think, no, mental health is just a way of describing the health of my head, and my brain and my soul, and it's no different really than describing the health of your body. And I loved a quote from one of our colleagues on another talk he did internally, that medication is for the body as meditation is for the mind. You have to treat your mind and your brain and your soul with as much respect as you might treat your body. If you think, I'm piled on a few more pounds, I'm getting quite unfit, I'm going to do something about it. But you need to think about your mental health the same way. It's like, I'm feeling a bit, look, I'm feeling a bit down, a sort of generic term. Why am I feeling down? I need to do something about it. The one thing that I think is different between mental health and physical health is that when you have a physical health issue, it can be quite visible to others, right? So you could be staggering around because you sprained your ankle, or you've got a cast on because you've broken your leg, or you're sneezing constantly because you've got a cold, or You know, we might have corona or whatever it may be. But if you've got a mental health issue, I think partly because there's been a stigma associated with it for such a long time, and we'll sort of delve into that a bit later, I think, and partly because it's physically, it doesn't necessarily immediately manifest itself. People don't know, and so you can't. It's not as obvious. And so I think that and also it could only be once a week. It could be on Monday morning you feel bad because maybe the cause of your depression or your stress or your anxiety is going to work at the beginning of a week, or it could be every Thursday when you have a big team meeting and you don't like being in big environments like that, or it could be whatever, right? There could be a trigger that could be every week or every month, and so it may not be something that is always bothering you constantly. So there isn't this persistent symptom, because if you think about a physical health, if you had a pain in your side for a week or 2 weeks or whatever, you'd probably go to the doctor and say, you know, I've got a pain in my side and I've had it for 2 weeks. And, oh, well, let's have a look at that and see what that is. And um, if you had if you felt anxious once a week or once a month, you might not necessarily feel that as a trigger to do something about it as well. But I do think the point that you made about mental health is different for everyone. Mental health issues are different for everyone is really key, because people tend to react the same way. If you break your leg, right, it's really painful, and the treatment's the same, right? They sort of glue it back together again, basically, in a simplistic term, or they get your body to kind of like knit it all back together again. If you're suffering from anxiety or depression, the treatment is unlikely to be the same for every human, right? There'll be different triggers, there'll be different causes, and there'll be different reactions. Some people just need to talk about it and support and counseling, and they may be at a point where they are able to just leverage that to sort of drag them back up to a level of normality, whatever that is. Some people, like myself, frankly, might need to have medication and a bit more intervention with professional counselors and therapists. But it varies quite a lot. So sorry, I've kind of like prattled on a lot about what I think, but that's sort of really what I think, is that mental health is not bad. Mental health is everything. We have mental health, we have physical health. We need to be aware of mental health as much as we are our physical health, but we need to probably monitor for longer than we do in just a physical space. And I had this book, these things actually, I got on my desk. This mind journal, which actually I was one of those kind of Instagram clickbait things where it said, you know, men have mind journal and you can write things down. But I found that personally really useful. It's not actually in here. This is an empty box because it came in a box and I can't find the journal at the moment. But this is the box it came in, and it, you know, for me it was, I wrote things down to actually work out what the cause of my anxiety and issues were, and that really helped me then understand how to move forward. I'm gonna sort of stop talking about this particular topic, but I will kind of ask you another one, which is, you know, at the moment, right, we're all working from home, and I think that we will likely have to work from home or work remotely for a lot longer. I did another video on resilience where we talked about personal resilience and community resilience, and then sort of corporate resilience, with Ben Bowers and with Toby Kent. And it was one of the things that we really explored there, was that you can't, humans are social as a social species, right? We don't do well when we're stuck by ourselves in a room, in the same room without leaving it, and maybe in the same environment with the same kind of pattern of what's going on. COVID, through necessity, has forced us to not just to work from home or work remotely where we're able to do so, but actually not go out and not participate in an actual community anymore, whether that community was work, whether that community was at home with your friends and family, whether it was a community of people you went to play golf with or go running with, or book clubs, or just people you see on the train every day and you got friendly with and just sort of chatted to on the way in, or popped to the pub on the way home, or whatever it may be, right? All of that's gone. So the support networks have gone. So I think for me, there clearly has to be a thought that coronavirus or COVID has made things more challenging for identifying and treating mental health issues. But more broadly, it's probably reinforced that humans as a species may not do well with change, rapid change, and forced change, and that has an impact on mental health. What do you think? I mean, does change impact mental health? Has COVID made things worse?
So absolutely. I mean, if you consider COVID, I think it did it was a bit of a whirlwind for everybody across the globe. And I think also the fact that everyone was going through some level of change as a result of COVID had a massive impact. And of course, everybody's busy trying to kind of deal with that, which is in some ways quite helpful because you can talk to other people about it and express yourself about it. And there's a level of common understanding, which I think was quite helpful for many, many people because they were able to have a bit of a whinge, whether it was a case of finding that work-life balance, which I think I'll dive into in more detail, but I'll leave that for now. But also it's a case of having that more common understanding of the challenges that we're all busy facing and the different perspectives, and people were open to those different perspectives because there was that broad recognition that things are changing rapidly. We're all going to have to be a little bit more tolerant, a little bit more understanding, and offer a little bit more support to other people as we went through this transition. But I think one of the things, and it kind of relates back to your previous question, is on what is mental health. I think the other thing is we were pretty good at understanding that we were going to need to recognize this. What we as humans don't tend to be pretty good at is being vulnerable and airing our vulnerabilities. And I think that's one of the key things that I certainly struggled with. And I mean, I'll be very honest in saying I was incredibly protective of the fact that I was struggling with mental health. I didn't want anyone to know about it, and I was paranoid about people finding out. And I think that's pretty common in terms of struggling with mental health because there is still the perception that mental health is bad. And therefore, I think we keep it quite close to our hearts. We tend only to confide in those people that we trust with our lives. And the reality is that those generally aren't the people that can help us. We have to get the message out more broadly, make it more common knowledge for people to help us in our everyday lives, because the people that are closest to us, be it our friends, be it our family, they're generally not the people that have influence over a lot of the stresses that we're going to encounter in our lives. So for us to be able to get over that hurdle and recognize ourselves that we're struggling with mental health, we have to put it out into a common domain and say, look, I'm really struggling. Be as open and vulnerable as you can in saying, this is what I'm struggling about, and divulge as much or as little information as you feel comfortable to do. But try and push your boundary on that, because when other people have that better understanding of what it is you're dealing with, they tend to be more tolerant. The fear or the attacks tend to come from a lack of understanding, a lack of knowledge about it. And if you just kind of shutting yourself off, isolating, and kind of pushing everyone away, they have no understanding. So therefore, it's going to be a case of, are you just lazy? Are you just not willing to engage? Are you just rude? And meantime, you're busy trying to kind of stop yourself from having a full-blown breakdown, but you're paranoid that someone's going to find out, so you're not letting them know. And I think the same thing then relates to COVID, how because we were all going through it, we were going, oh, let's be a little bit more understanding. Someone's got kids, they're trying to work from home, school at home, be mum, dad, and teacher all at the same time. They're trying to balance having a good meal on the stove.
And potentially worrying a lot about their own family and friends being affected by this virus as well.
Absolutely. I mean, it had massive impacts across the board that just rippled through. But I think also it was a case of people expecting themselves to be superhuman. So there was a time when work life was work life, and you would give your 110% there, and then you'd get home and you'd give your 110% there, and you're expected to have this really, well worked out balance. And I think one of the things that COVID's given us is an opportunity to reset our balance and say to ourselves, am I giving enough to my friends, to my family, and to my work, but am I also giving enough to myself? Or have I put myself on the back burner and kind of gone, I'm not going to focus on it because everybody else needs 110% from me? And so I think it's given us a unique opportunity to set your own boundaries, to make sure that you do put in a work-life balance. So one of the conversations I was having with someone quite recently is around, if you were to have a meeting in your diary that your boss had put in at 5 o'clock, you'd dial in and you would be there on time without any doubt, and you would make sure that you were ready for that meeting. Now, what if I were to ask you to put a meeting in for yourself at 6 o'clock for close of day, where you shut down your laptop and you go make some dinner or cuddle with kids or go for a run or close your working day? Would you feel comfortable with that? And would you actually be willing to go through that and treat that meeting with it as much priority and rigor as you would a meeting from your boss? And then lastly, if I were to say that meeting didn't come from you, but it came from your boss, so they put an end of day meeting in your diary, would suddenly that be more of a priority, more acceptable? And so it goes to this question of how much autonomy do you have, but also how much respect for yourself do you have? And maybe if you're not finding that balance between work life and home life and end of day and start of day, and it's all getting a bit blurred, maybe put that meeting in place, just like and attend it just like you would if it came from your boss. Because the reality is, if you keep pushing yourself at 110% and expecting yourself to be always on for work and always on for family and always on for everyone else, and you haven't taken the time to renew yourself, you will crash at some point. It'll be sustainable for a short period and you'll have ebbs and flows, but eventually you will crash, and then you're no good to anyone, not your friends, not your family, not your work. And whether it's a day sat in bed or 2 days or a week or 3 months, if things get really bad, the impact of that is so much worse than you just maintaining good rigor and focus on yourself and going, actually, I'm going to have that meeting in my diary. I'm going to shut my laptop. If something really urgent pops up, I'm sure someone will give me a ring and then you can attend to it. But the chances are most things are not that critical, don't need to be attended to at 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, and it can wait till tomorrow.
I love that. And I start a new job tomorrow.
Yes.
So I've got to meet the teams and everything, but I'd love the idea of putting something in everyone's calendar and saying, like a 7 p.m. meeting saying, why are you still working? Just to remind people that there is no expectation that people are working 24/7. It's people have to log off. People have to wash work off them, particularly on those difficult days, and create that work-life balance. And I think that where we have the luxury of boxing ourselves into our own office space, like looks like you do and I do here, and it's great to be able to do that. But if you're just sat in a bedroom or in a kitchen or in a shared space trying to work all hours, and then that area becomes sort of poisoned a little bit, because there's no blur, no difference between work and life then, because you're working in your life environment. Whereas I can take myself out of my work environment and walk through that door and it's life. as well, and personal life. I think that it's interesting when you think about this location independent and the different types of roles that we have as well. So if I'm in a UK bank dealing with larger European based staff and colleagues and stakeholders, I can work I would say 9 to 5 in a sort of slightly ironic, because it's never 9 to 5, it's whatever it needs to be, which is part of the problem. But anyway, let's say a normal 9 to 5 day, so I can do that. But if I'm now part of a global organization, or where we've embraced the global nature of an operating model to be able to staff up support centers to get 24/7 support, or follow a son, whatever it may be, we find people now working shifts. And if you think about our support functions that we have in the cyber area, or in technology support, or in ops support, there are people working 24/7 with eyes on glass, monitoring key systems, and there to be able to respond if needed. And how do we deal with that? Because all of a sudden, and call centers, we have our contact centers for our customers. How do we deal with that? How do we get now somebody who's sitting out in Chennai, and they're part of our contact centers, so they're on 24/7 coverage. So if someone in the middle of the night in the UK needs to speak to someone about fraud on their car, there's actually someone that picks up the phone. They're actually sat at home in the middle of the night trying to be quiet, because they got their family trying to sleep around them, and their children potentially in a room, hopefully not a shared room, but it could be in a room somewhere, and working. And that must be even more challenging than some of the challenges we have about just logging off at the end of the day. Actually, someone's trying to not wake up their family as they're working through the night. And I know that we could probably pick loads of these sort of examples as well. I think the other thing is, you talked about the heroics at the start of COVID and the lockdowns, and I've talked about that in a few other videos and blog posts I've done, particularly around location independent working, and how we've been able to do things in weeks that were scheduled for months or years, or we've been dragging our heels, particularly where it comes to collaboration tool rollout and things like embracing Zooms and video technology, which hasn't necessarily been a technology issue. It's been a people issue, wanting to use the technology, and actually having cameras on, right, I think is a massive step, which I think is in itself a bit of a trigger. And we can sort of come back to maybe that when we talk about, I'd like to kind of explore what sort of triggers can we look for, what sort of indicators are there that someone might be struggling. But we spent months going through this at the start of lockdown, thinking that this was maybe only going to last a few months, and then we'd be coming into summer and everything would be okay. And obviously we've had, certainly in the UK, we're on our third lockdown, but in between lockdowns, we've essentially had lockdowns, but just called them restrictions and different tiers, etc. But parts of the UK, it's just been a lockdown the entire way through. And when the dust settles on the heroics and pulling in your 18-hour days to be able to achieve an outcome which is right for your colleagues or for your customers, and you do that every day of the week, and then you sort of stop. And I think particularly around our NHS and other key workers that are just having, I mean, they are the true heroes, and they still are the true heroes through this pandemic. But it's even worse for them, I would say, because it's been relentless for them, right? There's been no opportunity for them to raise their head. And I do think that the combination of the heroics, the long hours that people have worked, I think all of the hours people worked, the stress people worked, and the inevitable upset of working in an ICU or in a hospital where people are passing away, as we know, sadly, through this horrible virus, that's going to leave scars, emotional scars, mental health issues, PTSD, which started off being associated with veterans returning from warfare, and now it's really people that have suffered these significant emotional issues and mental stresses will be coming back with PTSD and flashbacks. And we're kind of starting to get to a point where we have to acknowledge mental health issues, publicly we have to break the stigma down even more. And I think it's getting better, right? It's still not where it is, but it's getting better, because we are going to need to provide a lot of support for our work colleagues, for our families and our friends, and for a society globally that's become, maybe this is the woke moment now for mental health, right? Is people have become much more aware of mental health issues. And so we're going to have to provide the right support for people. And I think that, you know, as we move into location independent working as being much more embedded, and I think habitually we've formed a habit as a society globally now to work remotely, and we've shown it can work, right? The companies that have put it in place to sustain, like I just look at banks, right? Because that's familiar to us, financial services. It's not been easy, but it's been not as difficult as everyone thought it was going to be to actually work this way. And there's a habit has formed now, because we've been doing this for nearly a year, where we haven't had to go to an office. And even before that, we had dynamic working in place, so that if you all turned up to work at the same time, you wouldn't have enough seats, because we wanted people to have hot desking. We acknowledged that people didn't need to be in the office every day. We acknowledged that most people's days in the office were sat at their desk on a video conference or a phone that they could be anywhere in the planet doing as well. So a lot of that has changed now. And then, as I explored in this other video on resilience, what do we need to do to support people now? And how do we actually force people to help themselves? So maybe there's no lockdown anymore. People can go out and have their community support in their running group, whatever it may be. But they're still stuck at home, working in maybe what's become their sort of dark room of stress, if it is that's work that's causing that. And so there's something that we need to do there. And so there's different triggers. I mean, I think that there's different triggers that cause people to feel stressed and depressed and anxious. And I guess it'd be interesting to get your personal experience on what your triggers were. From my perspective, you know, I kind of ended up, you know, mine was a much more, it wasn't, work doesn't stress me. It never stressed me. All right. Me, it was much more of a personal issue. And I talked about anxiety buckets, and I made this video on anxiety buckets. So I drew things with crayons, which I quite enjoy doing. I'm good with crayons. It's one of my best things that I'm good at, is crayon drawing, and stick figures. Good at that as well. Anyway, that's just probably a whole separate topic, and I'll set up an Etsy store one day with my crayon, my stick figures drawing crayons. But you know, for me, it was probably that trigger was actually the bucket filling up, whereas I've been over decades, as in my case, being able to keep gradually filling the bucket up with my anxiety, and then all of a sudden it was like, and it overflowed. And so it wasn't necessarily a trigger; it was a build up, and then the trigger, in its sense, was probably just an overflowing. Now you could deconstruct that probably and codify that a bit more, but in a simplistic term, I just ran out of bucket, and it overflowed, and then medication made my bucket deeper than I could actually start to deal with everything, and now my bucket's got capacity. If I keep saying bucket, it becomes a weird word, but that was kind of my personal experience. What about you? What was your own personal experience, and what are your thoughts on others?
So I think first I'm going to step back a little bit, and you were talking about kind of the situation of COVID and dealing with it in crisis and PTSD and that type of thing. And I think there are a couple of things to recognize here about how the human body works. And I'm no expert, but I've attended a number of different talks. I've done a lot of research now. And I think one of the key things we have to bear in mind is what dealing with crisis looks like for the body. So as humans, we're very good at dealing with crisis and kind of forgetting our needs as humans during that period where we need to evade, escape, and essentially survive. And our brains and our bodies are very good at throwing a bit of adrenaline and going, okay, you're not going to get ill now because I realize you're busy going through a crisis. You're not going to feel the pain now because you're going through a crisis. But once everything starts to simmer down and get back to normal, so to speak, or at least it's a little bit easier for you to deal with, and things kind of get back to an even plane, your body then goes, right, by the way, you were ill, you've got a bunch of different aches and pains that you've not addressed, by the way, your mind's in a really bad place, and it all kind of hits you at once when you're in that stable state, so to speak, where you can deal with it. And many people aren't very good at recognizing that, and I for one certainly wasn't. So I went through a period of over 18 months of having 13 people pass away through various different tragic accidents at various different stages through those 18 months, and it wasn't one traumatic event. And I think for me, I was really good at putting something into a nice little box, going, I'll deal with that when I'm in a better place and have more time to focus on it, and slotting it into a shelf. The trouble was, when I kept having another box that I needed to put something in and slot it into the shelf wanted to topple over, and it did eventually. But I essentially wasn't dealing with the thing that had just happened. I was dealing with everything that had happened over 18 months and more, for that matter, because there were other things in my life that I hadn't dealt with, and it all kind of comes together and eventually falls over. But I think I first want to touch on the point you raised regarding PTSD. PTSD is in many ways exactly that, where your body suddenly relaxes, goes, oh, by the way, you've got all this that you need to deal with. And so you have flashbacks, and you have these moments where you suddenly facing that thing that you haven't dealt with, that thing that you're still struggling with, the thing that your mind hasn't been able to make sense of. And I think we're going to experience a lot of that over the coming months, especially as we start to get out of COVID and we get more people vaccinated, and things start to calm down. And especially in the medical industry, because they have been in a state of crisis. They've been looking after various people coming in, their hospital beds have been full, they've been busy. And when you're busy, you tend not to notice these things, and you tend to be able to get through it. But when you suddenly have that calm, peaceful moment, or you manage to book yourself some leave, it all comes crashing down. And I think the first things to do is, if you have gone through a state of change like COVID, and it's been really rough on you, start writing it down, because your brain will kick in later and say, oh, by the way, there's all this stuff that you haven't written down, so you're still trying to remember, you're still trying to process and make sense of. And if you're able to start writing these things down earlier, it makes dealing with it a lot better. You mentioned journaling and having that book. I think that's a really, really good start, but it's something we should all do. And I mean, I don't have a journal. I've got my phone, because I don't find journaling convenient, because I'm not carrying that book around with me the whole time, while I am carrying this. So I send myself notes all the time and rambles, and I have conversations with random people on my phone. But it's my way of then having it and having those reflections there, so I don't need to remember it. And it does help reduce PTSD. It does help reduce the stress and anxiety, and it stops your brain trying to remember it all as well. So then you can start to actually process what's on that piece of paper, rather than trying to remember every nuance of that event. So that's one thing, is we will probably see a lot more PTSD coming out of this, whether that looks at those working in the health services, or whether we're just talking about people who have had to make changes in their life to be able to deal with COVID. But I think something else I'd like to talk about is a concept that I learned from my psychologist, which was 3 pillars, or a tripod. And what she got me to understand was, I wasn't dealing with one big event. For some people, it's one big traumatic event that kind of gets their shelf to topple over, or their tripod to topple over. With me, it was multiple different aspects. And that tends to be the case. And to explain the tripod, what it essentially is if you consider one pillar to be friends and family, one pillar to be work, or whatever sustains you, your day-to-day life, and the third one being your purpose. And if you think about that as a tripod, And if you think about then the things that are happening within each of those pillars of your tripod, you're generally pretty stable if one tripod is having a little bit of turbulence in it. And your tripod will continue to stand and you can work around it and you can continue. But if you start finding two or more of those pillars are somewhat under attack, or you have turbulence in them and you're struggling with issues in them, that's where it starts to get more serious. But often what we will do is go, dismiss something because it seems quite small in one pillar, and dismiss something because it seems quite small in one pillar. And when it starts spreading across all three, then you start feeling really down and really depressed, and you start going through your isolation stage and saying, I don't really want people to know. I'm going to isolate because I'm feeling vulnerable, which is a common psychology, because we like to protect what we don't yet understand, and we like to protect what makes us feel vulnerable. So therefore we start to isolate. And that's the worst thing you can really do, because if you haven't yet understood those things, you're not going to understand them much better if you continue to ignore it and shelve it. You're not going to understand it if you're not talking to anyone about it, because you're only thinking from your perspective as opposed to a broader perspective. And so all these things start to play into it and can cause your tripod to topple. So what I'd say is if anyone's struggling and you're just feeling a bit depressed occasionally, start to write it down in one way or another, just so that one, you can help your brain understand it and say, what is this reoccurring thing, or potentially not reoccurring thing, but there'll be a theme that emerges if you keep writing these things down, to say, let me help myself in understanding it. Let me unburden my brain by not having to remember it. And thirdly, let me reflect on it and see if there's something that emerges as a common theme, a commonality amongst it. And then if you start feeling, actually, this is really quite, I'm really going through a bit of a dark time, a low time, a difficult time, that is the point at which you need to go actually talk to people. Because if at that point you don't know exactly what you need to do to fix it, the likelihood is you're not going to. Yeah. You need that external support, external engagement, external perspective in order to start addressing the matter. And I know you and I have gone through the concept of 3 pillars and journaling and the importance thereof before. And I mean, what's your experience of the benefits of journaling?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned at the beginning, I actually used one called Dailyo, which is on my phone, so I could just, write stuff down on the go. The reason why this empty box with the journal, which I do know where it is, just here. I'm going to lean down just so I can flick it at people.
Is it on the floor?
I'm still here. But yeah, I mean, so it's a proper book with paper, and some people like it. And if you go through it, what this does is it has a very similar approach to the app. So it sort of has like, how do you feel questions, and you can tick.
Yeah.
And then it has, what are your achievements, intentions? What are you grateful for? What's your happy hour? And what I like about the way this is structured, which is similar in the way to most of the apps are, is it just kind of gets you to think consistently, and it starts to get you to run mind exercises, which forces you to really dig a little deeper than you would if you just presented with a blank piece of paper. And so journaling for some people could just be write notes to yourself. But some people might need the structure. I needed the structure to just help me thematically mine the data to find stuff. But whatever happens, I think writing stuff down disarms it. Writing stuff down, talking about stuff disarms it, right? I think when we talk about what do you do to help overcome your mental health issues? We talked about treatment, and some people like that. Journaling, writing stuff down, disarming it, making a note of it, looking for patterns, trying to help understand what it is, talking about it, talk. I opened up, inspired by you, frankly, and I don't mean to embarrass you. Well, I don't mind embarrassing you. It's a bit fun, but it's I don't mean to kind of make you feel uncomfortable about it, but basically inspired by you and where you'd started your journey of recovery, not wanting anyone to know what was going on, and when you've ended your, well, I don't think any of us will ever finish our journey, but where you are on your journey at the moment, which is a significant uh, leap in recovery, where you are openly talking about very personal challenges, and I'm seeing it help other people, and it's helping me. Inspired by that, I decided to not try and hide um, what I've been going through. I try to treat it like a broken head, which is the concept you have, right? Broken head. If you wouldn't go to work with a broken, untreated leg, why are you going to work with a broken, untreated head? And that's essentially the way I was dealing with it, was that honesty. And when I opened up to people at work or my friends, and opening up was difficult because we were starting to get into this COVID stuff, but it was also difficult because it's personal. We're not, and frankly, as a man, and this is something which men are really, really bad at, which is talking honestly and openly about their feelings, because we don't have bad feelings and and all that sort of bravado nonsense, right? Which we've had sort of years and years and years of building up this perception that men can't be weak, men can't cry, and all that nonsense, right? And 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 I love the work that charities like Movember are doing to try to break down that stigma and that barrier, encouraging people to talk about their mental health issues, but also talking about general physical health issues, like check your balls for lumps, and go to see a doctor if you're getting specific symptoms. Make sure you get your PSA checked on a regular basis so that you can treat prostate cancer sooner rather than later. But what I was surprised by was how many people that I spoke to opened up back to me, right? And I was surprised because they never felt I mean, they were surprised that I had my own struggles, but I was surprised by their struggles because they never seemed to me like the sort of person that would have a mental health issue. Obviously, I know myself reasonably well, so I could say, well, I kind of understand why, so it makes sense, blah blah blah. For them, you just see the veneer, the facade of what you see, and we don't, because we're not good at sort of sharing personal secrets, and we might bury it under this facade, which, by the way, is a really bad thing to do, as we keep coming back to, because it just festers and gets worse. But I have people come back to me and say, oh, well, thank you for sharing, and I wanted to say, I went through this X years ago, or I'm going through this right now, or I've been on medication for years and seeing therapists for years for systemic depression or whatever it may be. Um and I found that personally quite encouraging, because particularly like yourself, people that have gone through this really, really low patch, but actually come out the other side. And they come out the other side stronger and more resilient, more mentally resilient to deal with things. And so the disarming of it to start with, and sharing and talking and writing down and identifying the triggers and the pain points, really not being afraid to get professional help. There was certainly, I think, in my mind, a stigma or perception that if you're going to see a psychiatrist or a shrink, you're one step away from getting in one of those straight jackets and a padded room, right?
Yeah.
And the same with therapy. And in reality, you go to a gym for physical health and fitness. We don't generally do anything for our mental health in terms of fitness. And there are a number of companies and charities that are setting up mental health gyms and things like that, and we have regular physicals. We go and say, I'm going to go and have my, because I'm over 40 years old, only just clearly only over 40 years old, I can get my annual physical now, and that's to make sure that if there's anything kind of eating away at me, that we can catch it and do something about it, and da 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 da. Intervention is there if it's needed. We don't have an annual mental health checkup. So one of the things I will do is, once I'm I won't say fully recovered, once I feel that the time is right to kick medication, all that sort of stuff, and we're getting better, is I would love to have therapy on a regular basis, just to have that mental health checkup and tune up and just check in. And so someone who's trained in stuff, right, can actually say to me, how you doing, and blah blah blah, and let's drill into these areas that I know is a hotspot for you, and 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 just explore how I'm doing, because I might lose my objectivity, which I think I have at the moment because of everything I've gone through. And I do want to continue to do some sort of journaling as well, although, I'm not very good at that. But I think that, for me, it's been really important, but it's just part of starting the journey of overcoming mental health issues, was writing things down. And then you kind of have to find other things that make you better as well, like professional help. But did you find other things when you were going through your recovery that were really helpful for you as part of your recovery?
I mean, I think first to say that I feel stronger now than I ever have before. Um, and I can honestly say that I am stronger now than I ever was before. And I think it's that classic situation of experience. Having now gone through it, I understand myself far, far better, and I understand the things that were busy eating away at me that I was really good at denying and not recognizing and saying, I'm fine. And I was really good at saying that outwardly as well. So when people would offer help, because there are bits where people start to recognize a change in your behavior. And so they might offer delicately some support. But when you're really good at maintaining a professional facade and saying, I'm fine, it's absolutely fine, I'll get through, you're almost not listening to that offer for help anymore. You're not listening to what people are saying. And it does start to draw away from your ability to connect with an individual as well. And I mean, back in the day when I was growing up, the only time you would hear about someone going to a shrink or a psychotherapist, as we affectionately refer to it, was when you had gone absolutely psycho and you were bouncing off the walls. And it essentially, it was a case of they'll get committed, no one will ever hear from them again, and no one will ever talk about them again. And that was the perception, at least for me growing up. So openly admitting that I'm now regularly going to see a shrink, or at least I was, and now I quite openly want to go and have a mental health checkup and tune up on a regular basis, whether it be every 6 months or at least an annual checkup. I think that's just a healthy thing to do. And I'm mindful of the fact that a lot of these perceptions come from the fact that until very recently, it was illegal to commit suicide. There wasn't just a stigma against it, it was unlawful. And so it's a case of everybody and the culture catching up with the fact that these things happen. People do get depressed, people do go down this route. But if we intervene early on, it's a lot easier to deal with. And I think one of the things I try and encourage people to do is recognize the fact that often if you shelving things, you don't know about it. You're not actually consciously aware that you're busy doing that. And to have someone just having a general conversation with you who's a trained professional, they're really good at going, what are the things that you're protective of that other people won't pick up? And they're really good at going through kind of basic timelines and identifying the bits that you potentially a bit vulnerable about. And those are generally the things that you're going, I've shelved, I don't want to talk about it, or I'm not ready to talk about it. And by having that annual checkup and someone just poking at it a little bit, going, this is a safe environment, it's not going to go anywhere. It's a situation where you can actually count on the support that they're giving you because they trained in it, and it's not going to have negative implication on them either. Because one of the things I felt is I didn't want to talk to other people because I had reached a stage where I felt I was a burden anyway. I felt I was the problem, and I felt that I was the common denominator in all these things going wrong. So I certainly didn't want to tell other people about it, because otherwise more things would go wrong. But what I failed to recognize, and that's the message I really want to get out, is start really early. The day that you're feeling a little bit down, or you feel like you're a little bit overlooked, or you're a little bit angry or upset, or whatever it may be, that's the point at which you should be addressing it. And you should be writing it down, talking to as many people as you can, getting different perspectives, just kind of making it common ground as much as you possibly can. Not doing what I did, which is, oh, nice little box, let's shove that in the shelf again. I had a whole rack of them, they were great.
Covering barbed wire and
exactly, very prickly box, no one can touch it. But it got to that circumstance, and I think, so that's the first thing, is to say, start early, because you probably don't recognize that you've got a whole shelf filled already, and all it starts taking is a few additional things to start toppling your tripod. But for me, I think there are a number of things that I started doing, bearing in mind that I had left this far too long. Had I gone back, I would do things very differently in hindsight. But I'm a lot stronger now, because once you kind of hit rock bottom, you can only really build upwards. And that's what I was lucky enough to do, was to, one, I started actually accepting a little bit more help. Okay, so I started recognizing the fact that I did need professional help. And that was a massive step for me, because in my mind, seeking professional help was for people who had come back from war-torn zones. It was for someone who was about to go bouncing off a wall. And someone said to me, how it can't get any worse. You're thinking about topping yourself. Where's the limit then? How does it get worse from there? And so that was a key point in turning around for me, is recognizing the fact that I did need professional help, and no one could make me get it of me. It was more difficult than it should have been to obtain, but I think that's a key thing. Tell as many people as you can. One of them will help you to get that professional support if you really do want it and you're seeking it. 2 is journal, write it down, understand it, give your brain time to reflect on it and actually understand what it is you're dealing with, because you might think you understand all the components. Your brain's probably trying to remember all the different nuances. Another thing is consider the real implications that it has on your life. So for me, I didn't want to give up work because it was a nice distraction. Work never really caused me stress. And it was one of the few things that were keeping me sane. But I couldn't really do my job as effectively as I might have liked to do. I like to think I was at the time, but I probably wasn't. And so if I had openly admitted to a larger group of people in that environment and said, look, I'm probably not as effective as I'd like to be because these things are happening, I would have had a lot more support on that front. And therefore it would have freed up some time and capacity for me to think on other fronts and to actually address my mental health. For me, unfortunately, it got to a really critical stage where I got booked up for 3 months just to attend to my mental health, which is a situation I don't think anyone wants to be in. I think another thing is start small. So I got to the stage where I couldn't climb out of bed. Getting groceries was like moving mountains. It just wasn't going to happen. And so just dragging myself out of bed once a week to go see my therapist took all the effort in the world. But eventually what I agreed with my therapist was I would get out of bed every day and I'd make myself a cup of coffee. Some days I would get out of bed, make myself a cup of coffee and go sleep next to my bed. But I got out of bed. And it's those small things that start to change your development and your escape from the clutches of suicide. And I would say that was probably the beginning of my journey to recovery, that very, very small step. But it also felt like moving mountains to do that. So look at your energy levels, look at where you are and where you're coming from in your context, and then find what's appropriate for you. If you have the energy to do something bigger, great, do it, and hold yourself to account on it. Because as much as we like to think that, and I mean, this went through my mind a lot, no one cares, no one's going to notice if I'm not around, it's going to be better for everyone if I'm not around. Those types of thoughts were going on in my head constantly. But I also recognize that a lot of my suicidal thoughts actually resulted from a ripple effect. So 3 of the deaths that I experienced were suicide. And that's what I was struggling with. Suddenly suicide became an option in my mind, because I was, quite frankly, a statistic. I was one of the people that was close to someone who had committed suicide, and essentially it's contagious. You start to think about it more regularly, and you start to think about maybe it's an option for you. You start to get drawn down into depression, and it's just a downward spiral. So I'd say if you have been close to or are aware of someone who has considered or has unfortunately passed away from suicide, before you do anything else, you will struggle with this. Your mind will start to play with this as an idea. So straight away start seeking help, because you probably won't recognize how quickly it spirals downward, and how quickly your thoughts start to turn dark. So I would say if you have been exposed to suicide in some way, straight away get help, because you're going to need it. But I'd also say that, look at your individual circumstances. It might not be suicide, it might be depression, it might be someone who's struggling with ill health and is slowly dragging you down because you feel like you need to be there as a support network, but your energy levels are slowly getting more and more sapped. So you have to take care of yourself before you can help anyone else. And that goes back to reflecting on your energy levels, doing what you can, making it common knowledge so other people can in fact help you, and you can actually say yes to that help and yes to that support. I mentioned the fact that I was really good at saying I'm fine. One of the things that helped me was eventually going yes to every person who offered to help, and then figuring out what they could help with later. It might sound a little bit silly, but one of the kind of lifesavers for me was my neighbor bringing me bread and milk. And it might seem really small and simple, but it's that slowly helps. And I'd say if you're trying to connect with someone who is really struggling, connect with them through, one, listening to what they're saying and following up with what they're actually saying. Don't make assumptions, don't necessarily start offering solutions, but listen to what they're actually saying and follow up on those conversations, and drop in little nuggets to let people know that you actually were listening, you actually do care, you did hear what they were saying, especially if they're giving you very little, because that means they're probably going into isolation stage. They probably closing off because they feel very vulnerable. Make sure you follow up on those tiny little responses that they've given you that are probably quite rude and dismissive. But if you want to be there for someone, It's the regularity of contact and following up with them every day, every couple of days, even every week, to say, I'm still here, I'm still listening, you haven't managed to get rid of me yet. And I'm going to keep coming back because I am listening and I do care, even though you think I don't. I'm going to keep showing you I do. And it's those things that kind of got me through it. Was one, the support that other people offered and the persistence that they offered. It was two, recognizing my energy levels and slowly making changes. It was making sure that I actually started accepting help, which was a massive step for me because I didn't want it. And quite frankly, I was quite ready to just check out. So shifting from it's not going to matter in a few days' time because I won't be around for it to matter, to going, okay, I'm going to accept bread and milk and help and that kind of thing. And making a common knowledge, removing that stigma from it, removing my own vulnerabilities about it and going, yeah, I'm properly insane right now. I can't get out of bed. I can't do anything. I'm a bit useless. And that's me. Welcome. And it takes a massive weight off of you and the paranoia seeps away. And then you're actually able to start addressing it as opposed to protecting it. So those were a few of the things that helped me.
Wow. Thank you. I think there's a lot for people to digest as you go through this as well, and I'm conscious of time as well. But there is a lot of what, I mean, inevitably a lot of what we've just talked about, we've talked about before, and I think it's really good advice for people that are struggling, but also people that are trying to help people that are struggling as well. And the two sides of that, if you're struggling, make sure you accept help. If you're trying to support someone who's struggling, don't give up, like basically pestering them to see how you can help. And make sure that you are in contact with them, that you're communicating, that you're checking in on a regular basis, you're asking open questions. I know you said to me, and I think it was one of your other colleagues that came up with the phrase, which is asking a question. Because if you say, why are you stressed, you're putting people on kind of a bit defensive and they can't necessarily articulate it. And why are you depressed, and actually one thing everyone does have is something that's annoying them, something that's stressing them. And so I think you'll correct me if I get this wrong, but what is causing you the most stress at the moment is an open question.
Or just what's causing you stress?
Yeah.
Because I mean, there are very few people who would say nothing.
Yeah.
I'm just fine and dandy. Most people would say, oh, you know what, but my friends or my family or the kids or work or something is causing them a bit of stress, and it just starts to evolve that conversation, and it's a really good even starting plane, and it tends not to put anyone on the defense.
It's a wedge, right? It's that wedge or that foot in the door, something that's basically you can start to now open the door a bit further and get the wedge in deeper, so that you're actually having a conversation and you can start to explore things. And it might not be the thing that's causing the most stress, but it's a stress, and you can start to talk about coping mechanisms for that. I do think that at the moment, with COVID and Corona, we talked about switching off and things like that. And I think that's really important with work-life balance, with colleagues to support each other, with managers and leaders to support their teams as well, and set the standards. Be the boilerplate standard for remote working. Log off at a period of time and say, I'm done, you're all done. Don't send an email to your teams at 9 p.m. at night just because you're working and you've chosen to work, or maybe you've needed to because there's a deadline and you wanted to get it right. Whatever it is, don't send an email to your team at 9 p.m. at night because you suddenly thought, oh, I just need this for my team, because they think you might want a response at 9 p.m. at night, or at 9:01 p.m. at night, or whatever it may be, right? And so they'll be working, and you might not have meant that, but culturally, I think we've all been there where we've seen that people go, oh no, you know, if Mike sends something, then I'm going to have to respond really quickly. Whereas Mike probably sent it because Mike will otherwise forget about it. So maybe I'll just write it down next time and remember to do it in the morning, and send the email out then.
Or delay your email,
So
or write it
well,
as a
yeah,
draft
you
and
know how to
send
do
it.
that, delay your emails. But yeah.
But yeah, because I mean, you're absolutely right. Senior management tend to set the tone. And if you're responding at all hours and sending emails at all hours, your team's going to endeavor to try do the same. And it does set a tone. So, albeit we all accountable to ourselves and we all need to be autonomous in making sure that we kind of find our own balance. I'd say for certainly this was a conversation I had with my team when I used to manage back in Africa, is they had a very open conversation with me about sending emails at 9 o'clock at night and saying we're going to try and respond, and you setting that tone of always responding, and always being essentially on and available at work. And it made it very difficult for them to keep up. So this time around going into COVID, I made a decision that I wasn't going to do that. I'd draft emails and things, but I'd send them the next morning as much as I possibly could, because otherwise you are just kind of setting a bad precedent, so to speak, with your team, where they can't have any downtime.
Yeah. I think then, you know, to look after your mental health, there are companies like Sanctus that are looking at these mental health gyms. There's Mind, there's Movember, there's City Mental Health Alliance. There's a lot of companies, charities, partnerships that are out there to help provide sort of tools, videos, whatever, you know, in your own time you can go and look into that stuff. We talked about journaling being really important. Start with small things. I love the making the bed. Since we talked about it, I do tend to make my bed most days now once I've turfed the youngest son out of it, who's crawled in the night or whatever it might be. And there was an admiral who there's like one of these again clickbait videos on leadership that you can get where there's an admiral doing a commencement speech in university, and he said, you know, that was one of his opening things is like, you've achieved something that day. Just make your bed. You've achieved one thing.
Yeah.
Now try and focus on the second thing to achieve in the day. So start with small things that are achievable, and then build up from that. That kind of pattern and routine, I think, becomes quite important, particularly in lockdown. Like, so you have your sort of diary entries for logging off. Well, maybe have your cup of coffee every morning if that is your pattern. Go for a jog every morning if that is your pattern. Do things that are going to help you. Physical exercise actually does benefit the mind. It's well proven. You know, there are dopamine levels that get that shoot up when you've actually done physical exercise. So it's a good thing to kind of get your body pumping and get your heart moving, and getting some of these neurotransmitters flowing and firing a lot better. So it will make your brain stronger and healthier by just doing exercise. And maybe, I know we spoke about this, where instead of spending an hour and a half each way commuting to London for work, which is sort of my day, maybe I need to spend an hour and a half each day exercising, or well, maybe half an hour. I don't know. But you know, sometime exercising instead of that commuting time, putting that to good use, or feeding my soul by spending more time with the kids because they're working from home as well. You know, things that actually benefit me. I know that, yeah, both of us are part of the Bike Shed Motorcycle Club, and they have a t-shirt and a hat, which I'm not wearing the right one, which is the motorcycle saved my life. And I do think that for me, I feel that motorcycles have been part of what's helped me to recover, but not so much the motorcycle and swearing at motorcycles when they break down, or going out for a nice ride to clear my head. All those things are good and fun for the mind, but actually the community. And the community that I referred to when I open up to friends, you know, some of the people in that community have had really diverse lives, and they're quite interesting and quite challenging. So they've got a lot to share. Some very similar to the, the our own, some very different to our own as well. And it's been very interesting to hear from them and to talk from them. but also it's that community that we've been able to do a lot of virtual events, and we've been able to do virtual meetups and virtual chats and kind of virtual interviews with people like Charlie Borman and others that are well known in the biking community. And that gives us an opportunity to connect, or just virtual beers and coffees and things like that. So creating that community in some way, it doesn't replace the human contact. As I said before, humans need to smell other humans to feel connected, to feel intimate with each other, and to build that trust and that relationship. But actually, it's better than nothing, right? Doing things like meditation, medication for your body, meditation for your mind. So yoga, meditation. Yoga is great because it's good for your mind and for your body. And again, if I was talking to me 2 years ago and saying, hey Mike, you're going to be doing yoga in like a year's time, I'd be like, yeah, what? No, I'm not doing yoga. That's for women, right? And obviously unconscious bias or completely conscious bias, complete rubbish, right? Yoga's for everyone and anyone, any age, any shape, any size, and it will benefit you massively. So I'd encourage everyone to go and try it. There's loads of stuff on YouTube. You can sign up for a lot of these free yoga courses as well, or you can pay for them, which is worth doing as well. Maybe get something one-on-one, because you're probably doing it wrong, like I probably still do after a year of doing yoga. But for me, that's helped my body massively, helped my mind. There generally, most yoga sessions will have an element of meditation in there as well. Monitor yourself. Watch out for your own symptoms. Watch out for burnout. Talking to people. Ask people to keep an eye on you. One of the things I did at work, and it wasn't work for me, was not the cause of, like yourself, it wasn't the cause of my anxiety or my issues. And so, but I still nevertheless asked my assistant and my people with my team. I said, hey, do me a favor, keep an eye on me, will you? Like, if I start doing something that seems a bit odd, can you just tell me? Now, people that know me might realize that's probably a difficult thing to find. What do you mean by odd? But it was helpful to have people keeping an eye on you in the same way that I would keep an eye on them, and I would keep an eye on my family and friends as well, and just make sure that they're well and they're healthy. And so you've got these two sides to it. You've got to keep an eye on yourself. You've got to be honest with yourself. You've got to monitor yourself. You've got to keep an eye on your mental health. You've got to understand that there are people to help. People want to help. You're not alone. People care about you. And it may not be your best friend. It may not be your friends and family that are the ones that care about you the most. It may actually be someone who is currently more of a stranger that will care about you because of the way they're wired and their natural empathy. And this comes back to me, and maybe this is where we could start to wrap up a little bit in here, is the stigma of mental health. And why do people not feel like they can talk about it? Why do people wait until it's too late to talk about it? I think because of your honesty, Nikita, and because of others as well that I've spoken to, I was able to intervene with myself before I got too far down the track, before it was too late. Right. And I thank you for that. And I thank everyone else that supported me to make sure I never got to a point where I had done something silly or something irreversible. And so for me, I keep monitoring myself and checking in on myself now because I'm aware of it. But I didn't do that, right? And I think other people need to do that. But the biggest thing is I want to talk to people. I want to admit that I'm a problem. Hi, I'm Mike Butler. I've had mental health issues, and I'm on the road to recovery. Why don't other people feel comfortable doing it still? Why don't you ask other people if they're okay? If someone like yourself, if you were off for 3 months with mental health issues, how many people came to say to you at the end of that, hey, how are you? Right. Whereas, sorry, I'll let you answer that question. Right. So how many people came to ask you how you were after being off for 3 months?
So I think it's really interesting. I'm going to answer your first question, which was why don't people talk about it? And I think generally it's a circumstance where people think they have it under control. We like to think we in control. And the reality is when we start losing control, we're pretty bad at admitting it, or at least I find most people are. And so it's only once it starts getting to that dire extreme state that we start going, actually, there's something wrong here. and we're not very good at reflecting on it much sooner, unless, like you said, you kind of more exposed to it, and then you start actually going, actually maybe this does have some credibility in my life as well, maybe this is applicable in my life as well. And one of the things I chatted to someone about recently is all the people who have never attended a mental health session because they're going, oh, it's not for me, I don't need that. Those are generally the people that we should be going, okay, so we need to sit you down and have a chat about this, because you really do need it, because you're a prime case for putting it in a shelf, ignoring it, and thinking it's all okay. So I think the first thing is to start having broader conversations about this, so that we can talk about a broken head and address a broken head just like we would a broken leg. And you can talk to anyone about a broken leg, so why wouldn't you talk to anyone about a broken head? So I think that's the first thing, is making it broader, the topic more accessible, and getting those people who kind of go, it's not for me, I don't need to worry about it, to recognize that maybe it does have some application in their life as well. In terms of answering your second question on how many people approached me after I came back from my time booked off on long-term sick, I always felt that the roles were reversed. So I expected people to be quite curious, and my general colleagues to be quite curious. And they weren't. In fact, I had, very few colleagues come up to me and say, it's good to see you back, why were you booked off, or just generally. Most people just stunned silence. They didn't say a word, they didn't engage me. They would engage me in relation to an activity or a work task or a project or a program, or a directive of some sort. But I think people find it really awkward to engage and say, look, I noticed you were gone for 3 months. Where'd you go? What happened? And so that was reversed in the sense that my general colleagues didn't say a word. But senior management, on the other hand, very different situation, where they were all connecting and going, hey, saw you were booked off, feel free to book a coffee in my diary. And as a result of those conversations, I found out a lot about the senior management, who generally had gone through some very traumatic experiences, had also gone through mental health issues themselves, had gone or were going through a journey of recovery. And I think something I'd like to emphasize is people often think of someone who's gone through mental health as still slightly broken. And they kind of put that in that a little bit fragile box. And I'd like to dismiss that and turn that myth around and go, actually, the people who have gone through that have some experience that they can apply. They can recognize people breaking in their teams, people struggling in their teams far quicker, and they know how to support. And they have a good idea about how to start engaging those conversations, and they don't let people back away into the darkness and back away into their closed rooms and boxes, because they're going, I'm not going to push, but I'm going to be here, and I'm going to keep being here, and I'm going to keep persisting, and I'm going to keep letting you know that we're here to support you, and I'm going to kind of make sure that you know that we're here if you need it. And to me, that speaks levels on leadership. And I think the reality is that I would never wish that anyone had to go through what I went through. But I can honestly say I'm a lot stronger for it, and I can help a lot more people equipped with that understanding and experience. And I wish people would start saying, I'm starting my journey, because you're starting a journey to becoming a bigger, fuller, better person in understanding yourself, your triggers, what makes you succeed and fail, what makes you tick on a day-to-day basis. But it's also starting that journey on going, if you're prepared to openly say it, you can help so many more people. And that's what this is about, right? That's why we're having this conversation. Let's start helping the bigger community. Let's start supporting the bigger community, and let's start opening up about these things and dismissing any perceived stigma there is, because there really shouldn't be one. You're growing as a person, so let's grow together and learn from each other's experience. Let's hope no one has to go through what I went through to get this experience. Let's hope people will listen to me and you and others to gain it through a much more seamless kind of systematic and kind of frameworked approach even. So that's my thoughts.
I think that's a good place for us to wrap on the interview as well. It's very poignant and powerful messages there. So thank you very much for your honest, open dialogue and sharing everything. As you said, I hope people find this useful, and it helps others who are struggling, and it helps others who want to help people who are struggling, or who want to help noticing who's struggling and then help. I will put some links at the end of the video and on the description for the video or the podcast, depending on how you're watching or listening to this, for things like Mind and Sanctus and Movember and other sort of other and the physical and the virtual journals. But thank you very much, Nikita, for spending your time this morning, and hope to catch up with you soon.
Absolutely, and thanks so much for having me, Mike, and thanks for always being so open with your experience as well, because it definitely is a two-way street. We always learn from each other. Thank you.
Thank you.